Hello everyone. Welcome to the Microdesk webinar series. My name is Megan Pulgar. I'm the Marketing Manager here at Microdesk. Welcome to today's webinar, Painting a Picture in Sketchup, Mapping Photos on Objects. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Microdesk is an Autodesk Gold, Oracle, and Google partner. We provide technology training and consulting solutions for the AEC industry. We have 12 offices located throughout the East and West Coast with a staff of over 90 consulting and technical specialists. Sketchup is a great tool to build, conceive, and play with 3D modeling. Whether it's for in-house designing or a client presentation, knowing the right methods to build your model is key to using the program effectively. In this week's webinar, learn how to take your photos and map them onto objects to create photorealistic models of buildings and other objects. Presenting today's session, we have with us Microdesk Senior Consultant, Peter Marchese. Peter joins Microdesk as a senior consultant with expertise in architectural technology solutions. He has extensive knowledge working with AutoCAD, Architectural Desktop, and Revit. At Microdesk, Peter works with national architecture firms implementing Revit. He specializes in custom training and content creation and leading firms through the process of creating standards and workflows based on building information modeling technology. Just a few logistics before we begin. In order to minimize any background distractions, you are all on mute for the duration of the session. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question area of the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. Peter will address as many questions as he can at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time, we'll provide you with our contact information and you can follow up with us. And now I will turn it over to Peter.
Thank you very much, Megan. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going over how to build a model in SketchUp based off of your actual photos. So there's a lot of different reasons why you might want to do this. Maybe you have an existing project that we're going to come in here and do an addition on, or we're going to modify it, or we need something to put next to a model that we're doing elsewhere. But whatever the reason is, this is actually a very fast and easy way to do so. So I'm in SketchUp right now, regular program, nothing special about it. And first thing I'm going to do is say File, Import. This is going to open up basically with the regular import settings. I may have to change the files of type so I can actually see the ones I'm looking for. In my case, I'm looking for a JPEG image. And that image I'm going to start off with is this one. So if anyone is familiar with the Valley Forge area in Pennsylvania, this is essentially the George Washington headquarters building on that site. So what I'm actually going to be doing is modeling this in SketchUp based off of these 3 photos. So essentially you can just go out to the site, take 3 photos, and now I pretty much have more than enough to actually build a model based on all this. So back in SketchUp, I'll select my first image I want to work off of. And what I want to make sure I'm doing here is I'm telling it I want to use this as a matched photo. So you can see where the circle is on the screen here. That's telling SketchUp that I'm not going to use this as like a background image or like the ground, or I'm not going to use this as a texture like brick. I bring this in, sets it up in my view, and this is usually where a lot of people, when we're teaching the class on how to do this, get a little bit nervous. You have a whole lot of lines here. Key thing here is to take this one step at a time. We're not going to look to do everything all at once. We're not going to get it perfect all at once. First thing I want to do is take this line here, the blue line, and drag that bottom point down to the corner that I'm going to be working off of. Now, this part's important. Everything else after that's going to change as I work. But I'm going to set this up so that way if I look at my photo, essentially it's a 3-point perspective. So I've got my vanishing point here, vanishing point there, I've got my axis. So what I want to do is set this up on that corner. That's my corner of the building. And then from there, I'm not going to touch these lines on the side here, the long ones. I'm only going to manipulate these short ones. And as we'll see, as I start to change these, everything else adjusts. Now, typically in a class, what will end up happening is everybody tries to get that one line just perfect, and then they change one other thing, and everything else goes wonky. Main thing here is don't worry about that. Get them close. You're going to have to change this a few times anyway. So I get that somewhat nearby. Set this one up over here. I'll use the top of that door. And everything looks really bad right now. I don't care, though, because as I go around this, it's actually going to fix things. So I'll set this one up here on that roof. And I'll put this one over here on this roof. So already it's getting pretty close. Once I have all this, though, you'll see my little tools over here. Now I'll zoom in, and I'll get this as tight as I feel I need it to be or as much as I can be. So I'll zoom in on that side and just massage that in there. So I'll put that one on there. And I'm just panning around and getting things as close to the lines that I can see taken by the perspective of the photo. So if I have a building that has siding on it, it'll be a lot easier because I have a lot longer line work to work with. So I'll come over here, get that point. And I can see that that line now follows that corner. So I need to move this up a little bit here. There we go. So I can see that that's actually lining up with that back portion of the wall. You have this thing jutting out here. So that follows that line there. This goes up that corner of the building, and everything else is set there. So this is the first thing. I have to get this all dialed in, and that will allow me to start to actually build my model. Now, I have my match photo window here. See, if it ever closes by accident, you can always go to the window pull down, find it from there. And what I need to do now is make sure that when I build this, it's actually at the right scale. So essentially, I could be building something that is the size of the Burj Dubai, or I can be building something that's a little dollhouse. But all these big squares that I see around my photo, that grid, that's actually at a 10-foot spacing right now. And I see that grid based on whichever of these tools I'm choosing. So what kind of grid do I need to see? Which area do I look at it on? So I can modify this to make sure that I'm building this to the correct scale. So if I look at this and I figure that that door there is 6'7". Okay. I'll say 6'7". So this grid now is 6'7" square. If I hover over the blue line in the middle, what I'm going to see is an up and down arrow. If I click on that blue line and move my mouse up and down, you can see how this grid actually resizes. So what I'm looking to do is make sure that this actually is the right scale based on the information in my view. So if I look here, I can see where that grid is. I can make this larger or smaller based on what it is that I'm working with. So I see that's right about there. That's right about the right scale. So depending on what I'm working on, I typically am going to try to get at least one measurement in the field or find something that works. So for example, if you have brick, you know that 3/4 of that is 8 inches. I can work off of that. Now, at this point, I've set up my perspective, basically the angles. I've set up the scale. Now I can actually start to model this. At this point, what I'm going to say is done. Clicking on done means I can actually see this, but once I start to orbit my view, I lose everything. Nothing's wrong. All that means is that I change my perspective, and I'm only going to see that imagery right now when I'm looking at it from the right angle. All I have to do is click on this tab that gets created automatically. That takes me back to the right viewpoint. So what I can set up now is actually start to draw. What I want to make sure I'm doing is I'm keeping things set for the correct axis. What I mean by that is that I'm actually going to be locking my mouse to the correct axis. So if I want to draw straight up and down, hit the up arrow. Now I know that this is going to be going in the correct direction. The reason why this is important is it's very easy for me to draw something here that looks correct, but in reality is, going off at the wrong angle. So there to there, that's on the red axis. I'll lock that there. That comes back down. And I close this off. So I just got my first surface. For things like this, it's easy to set it up so that I know everything is right where it needs to be. I can snap to the midpoints, snap to the edges. This depends on how I want to draw that. So it'll all come up to there. And I'm just cleaning this up. And if there's lines that I've created that I no longer need because I used them in a way to sketch, I can clean those afterwards. So at this point, I'm really just tracing the information that I need. And it understands what direction I'm going because, again, I set all this up in the very beginning off that photo. Okay. Get that out there. Good. Oop. And again, if I accidentally orbit, just come back to that view. That flattens it out again. So I'll come over there, lock it on my green axis. Bring that back up. Straight down. So far, I've got this. So pretty simple so far, not a whole lot going on. But now that I have that, I can start to draw this out there. I don't really know where it stops just yet. So I might make a guess, line that up a little. For things like the roof, I can close that off because I know based on that portion, if that snaps to there, that'll come down and hit there. And then when I actually set things up for this portion, I'll end up using the PushPull tool, give myself the actual thickness of that roof, and then you can see it starts to line up again. So just a lot of little pieces here and there, putting them all together, and actually figuring out where things go. This portion here that juts out, yeah, now that I have this portion on that wall drawn, I'll continue that out, draw that straight down, finish that portion. And just by locking the axis, I can make sure that things are going exactly where I want them to. And for something like that, that one's easy to come out. And then close off. And now I have that little platform. And then I can start to actually put that dome on there. I can draw the roof. I can start adding as many other pieces to this as I'd like. Now, this is the part that's usually pretty easy, setting it up on one corner. The thing that I mentioned, though, is that I actually have a couple of different angles of this building. So how do I actually put all of these together to actually really make a real full building? This portion is pretty easy. Got a camera from one angle, no problem. But what I need to do is actually set this up so I can work on the other side. So if I come over here and say File, Import Again, it'll let me do this. The problem is it's going to try to align that view from the exact same origin, meaning from that corner of my building. I don't want that. I want this next photo to be taken from a different location, possibly on this side. Again, it depends on what I'm trying to do. But in this case, that is actually what I want to do. I have a photo from over here. Maybe I want to take it from that corner if I can set it up. I don't have enough data for that yet, but I will. Or maybe I want to work my way around to the back of this and just do the back side of that. Depends. For now, though, what I'm going to do is set this up on that corner. So my red axis will be in that direction. green there, and blue up. What this does is it tells it that now when I import the next image, I want to use that origin that I just created for this. Because otherwise what we've done is literally tried to put that image on top of the other one. Now at this point it's going to look a little weirder than the previous one because I actually have a model to contend with. Again, not a big deal. I'm not concerned about any of this. It's going to look really weird or like a mess for a bit. No worries. I'm going to fix that. So the main thing is just to make sure I'm setting things where they can be used to actually organize the view, where I can set things up to actually lay out what that vanishing point is going to be looking like and where it's going to. So, just moving things around, getting to where I'm going to work with them. No worries. So I'll set up my corner, and right around there. And it's the exact same process as the previous time. Okay, just get it close. And I want to do laps essentially around my photo. If everything looks like it's going inside out or breaking, that's not a problem. Don't be concerned about that just yet. If everything is put exactly in the right location and it's still a problem, then we'll work on that. But for right now, it's really just getting everything relatively close so that I can use these to line up. So far, so good. Getting it nearby where it needs to be. In this case, let's see here. Good. In that case, I may need to invert these so that's facing the right direction. There we go. Just to spin that around so it faces the right direction. But what I'll end up doing is I'll actually walk around, same thing as before, put all this together, and end up setting this up. Now, if you ever hit done and you really realize, you know what, I'm nowhere near done yet. I still have a lot of work to do on this. Come back over to that view, and on the Match Photo ribbon, you have the little button there that says Edit Match Photo. All you need to do is click on that, and you're right back in the same view as you were before. Now I can come over here and start modifying this. So in this case, setting up my origin where I did. Let me hop out of this for a second. There we go. So setting up my origin for that photo. Because of the angle of that photo looking at this, I actually needed to change this so that way green was in one direction and red was in the other. So I had to turn a little bit too much to the one side. Not a problem. Now, going through this process, what I'm really going to be doing is going back and forth and, again, massaging things, getting one piece done at a time, adding more and more content to this. As you work on this, though, which you'll work up to, a little further along than I remembered, what you'll end up working up to is the point where you actually have everything modeled. So I'll have that whole side laid in. I'll understand where my windows are. So if I want to draw something really quick, I could actually model that if I needed to. If I'm not going to actually show depth on that, I won't worry about it. Certain things like my stairs, I might actually model that and then draw some lines on this so that I actually can project them the correct amount. So in this case, just using push-pull. Wrong portion. There we go. Now I just clean this up. With this, though, all I've got is a solid element. Coming from this, I can tell it to project the textures from the photo. Doing that does this. Now, at certain locations, what you'll actually end up having is some dead spots or shadows. This is because this object here got the photo printed on its surface from the angle that I was looking at. So in this case, what I need to do is just come back in there and clean that up a little bit. But all of this information is actually on that surface. If I decided after the fact to go back and modify those windows, when I push-pull this in, that window material stays on there. So it's not like this is hovering in front of it. This is literally baked onto the surface of my model. And if I get to the point where I've done a little bit more work, so let's close this off really quick. And I do that. I can always come back to that view, tell it to project, and either say overwrite the existing or just put it on the new ones. So again, just like before, I'm not locked in once I've done it the first time. I can continually go back and forth and add more and more information to this. The more accurate the model is, the more accurate the actual imagery on that surface will be. So if I actually did model, in this case, my little Eve on the side, this wouldn't look so weird. Certain areas, though, if you have a very acute angle, what you can actually do is manipulate that photo. So if I select on that material, I can right-click on this. What I can actually do is modify that texture. So this allows me to literally move the texture in and out. I can tell that the angle itself, it's almost like keystoning it if you're used to using a projector. And if you get to the point where you realize, yeah, I kind of broke something, I can always tell it to reset. Now, the problem with the reset is it literally resets it back to its original location. It's not resetting it or undoing it. Control-Z is still your undo. And if anything ever gets to the point where you really messed it up, again, go right back over here, project it again, and tell it to overwrite. It'll just put it back based on this image. With the kind of work that you're doing here, it's very easy to take everything here and get it to the point where it's like this. In this case, you can see the stairs are all modeled out. I still have that area here to clean up. Because I actually have that Eve done, there's a little shadow there, but on this side it's pretty clean. But certain areas don't look very good. And there's a couple of things that I can do to fix this. If I open up my materials, one of the tools that I actually have essentially is a paint can. If I use my eyedropper, I can sample an image from one location and then paint it onto another. So in this case, that stonework from here, I just painted onto that side. Doesn't go all the way across. No problem. The thing I just did, go in there, modify that texture's position, and either I move this over, or if that won't work, I'll stretch this. Whether this is exactly what you wanted or appropriate to it, really depends. But just by taking that image and copying it and literally pasting it across to the end, it looks like I need it to. And because I pasted it from the same thing, it looks like it actually turns the corner quite well. So without having the correct information, so again, like that little stair, I'll use the eyedropper on the one side, paint it on the other. For buildings that are, I don't say simple, but relatively simple, where you have a similar look on both sides. Maybe you only got a photo of the one side. I could literally pick the one side of this building and paint it onto the other side. If I have the brick on this one, I can paint the brick on the other one. This depends on how I want to organize this. Now, when you get to the point where you actually have everything for the most part set up and modeled, and you want to actually see where this exists within space, essentially what I mean by that is, let's say you want to turn on your shadows, and you want this to actually be accurate for where you physically are. So if I'm using this for a presentation, I probably want to make sure that my shadows aren't coming from the wrong direction. In that case, what I need to do is actually tell Sketchup where this file really is. The only issue with that is that I can't really move things around as easily as you might like. The best bet for that is to start a brand new file, tell it where your project is. So I'm going to say add a location. So Washington headquarters, Valley Forge, PA. That's this building right here. tell it to select my region, and then I say grab. So that actually brings it into SketchUp. Now, even though I can click on this, and if I wanted to, I can move it, it starts off as pinned or locked. The reason why I would prefer to do this in a separate file is because what I can actually do is, again, import, but change this so it's looking for a SketchUp file now. Select the SketchUp file that I just finished building, and now I can actually drop that whole file as one big piece. So if I need to rotate this, I can grab that file and rotate it. This gives me a lot more control from a standpoint of how do I place this on the actual site. So if I need to move things around, move it up or down within space, I'm not modifying the file that I'm actually working in. I'm just moving it around like a big block. So in this case, once I've got that where I need it to be, I can actually turn on a little bit of the topo from the surface that I just brought in. I might need to select this and move it up a little bit. But now it's actually sited on the real site, in the real location with some graphics behind it. And I can actually see what happens in different times of the year and different times of the day. Any questions so far? All right. So in this case, this file that I'm using here is a little bit more complex than things that we would typically do in our Essentials classes. The Essentials 1 are a little bit more of just a simple rectangular shape. But what I wanted to show with this is that if you have a building that has multiple sides, multiple facades, angles, it is actually quite easy to do this. The main thing, again, to remember is that when you're building this, you want to set this up so that it's not going to, so that it will actually understand what angle you're coming from. If I actually open that up again, sketch models, go. In this case, you can see, very simple object. As I move this around, every one of these lines up with that photo. And anytime I need to modify, you can actually see how all of these are lining up with different parts of it, whether it's on the eave, the line of the roof, the ground plane. I'm just trying to find something here that I can actually work this off of so that I can actually manipulate this. And if I realize halfway through that things don't line up just right, maybe I had my scale off a little bit in one of the views, I can always go back into these and modify this. If I need to change how big or small something is, again, nothing's ever locked in stone. And then at this point, what I can start to do is go to the different views, project those textures, and then I have that. And then for things like this that go up and under, use the paint can, get the information that I need there. So if I take something like, say, this wall, I can always paint that in there. And just like I did before, take this texture and modify it. Oops, wrong one. There we go. So I'll stretch this out, make that bigger. Move this over so that there's all stone. Yep. Then I can make this a little bit shorter so the stone doesn't look too tall. So all I'm doing is taking advantage of the images that I started with. So if you have a laptop, you can go out to a site, take a couple of photos, build a model in a few minutes. And then from that point on, it really just depends on what it is you want to use this model for. Any questions from anything that I did? Remember, there's a little questions box that you can actually type them into. Okay. One of the questions we got is, do you need to have plugins, or do you need to have the Pro version? All of this is done straight out of the box, default free version of SketchUp. So you don't need to have the Pro version. You don't need to have any of the plugins. I have a lot of plugins installed, but I'm using none of them for this. Another question I got was, why would I do this if I would prefer to use Revit? Easy thing for that is, if I'm working in Revit and I want to do some environmental analysis, maybe I need to build my surrounding buildings for my project site so I can get an idea of how much solar radiation I need. The photos here and the ability to set things up for scale with my vanishing points, that allows me to make sure that my surrounding buildings are the correct height so I can get an appropriate mass of my environment. So I can actually see what's happening, whether it's for wind analysis, solar, anything along those lines. So I might still do all of that work in Revit, but this gives me a very quick way to build the ancillary information that I need. So there's no more questions. Just like to point out that if there are actually some questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, or this is interesting but you feel you'd really rather have someone walk you through this one-on-one, we do actually have a lot of different kind of classes. So we have our Essentials 1 and 2. So this is actually covered at the end of Essentials 2. For the Advanced Skills, we look at this as well, and Advanced Landscape covers this as well. So I just want to say thank you very much for spending your time here. We appreciate it. And if there's anything else that we can help with, please feel free to let us know. Thank you.